You talk in your book a lot about brain chemicals too, which surprised me. Can you explain the difference between introvert and extroverts' needs and uses of dopamine and acetylcholine?
Sure. So this came through some research. I had no idea about these sort of things, and but I always used to kind of chuckle when people said, I want to get over my introversion. I want to overcome that, or I used to be an introvert, but now I can socialize.
Right.
And as I discovered things about brain chemicals, it helped me to realize we don't overcome our introversion. We can learn about how to use it and master it and do well with it, but we're not going to overcome it. It's really in our DNA and it's in our brain chemicals. So every brain has chemicals, dopamine and acetylcholine, and we have receptors in our brain. And so for extroverts, their receptors need dopamine. They crave dopamine like many other drugs, they really can't get enough dopamine. So how do extroverts or introverts get dopamine? Well, usually it's from interaction. It's that social interaction. It's feedback. It can be having nice little debates. It just secretes more dopamine that the body needs. And so we all have that, but for introverts, a little bit of dopamine goes a long way. And as we can probably all attest to, if I have too much of that, it just overwhelms me. I get exhausted. Whereas extroverts just need that dopamine. They can't get enough. So they hop from party to party or from cubicle to cubicle talking to people at work. But introverts are not absent from having a chemical craving in our brains. Very similarly, we crave acetylcholine. So acetylcholine, not surprisingly, is secreted in the brain from things that are more come from calmness and comfort. So for us, that can be things that we've already talked about, reading or just being introspective or having a little bit of time alone, doing things that we really enjoy with people that we know and enjoy. And that provides us with the acetylcholine or good things. So our body, both as an introvert and as an extrovert, we do things that help to satisfy that craving. And so those chemicals it's happening all the time. We can't really adjust those or change those, but we can learn how to find our strengths and excel as an introvert, just as extroverts tend to do for themselves as well.
So does that mean that an extrovert hangover is a real thing? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say extrovert
Yeah,
hangover?
yeah, I think that I mean, even extroverts sometimes will just need to relax, just as introverts like to socialize. But I think for introverts in particular, too much socializing, and we feel like maybe I drank too much, but I just got too much dopamine, really. And so I think understanding again, we talked about awareness earlier with the energy equation, but understanding kind of where we are and when we've had a little bit too much, that rather than stay in a situation where we just get more and more dopamine overriding our bodies and we just become not only exhausted, but maybe a bit agitated,
Yeah.
to just remove ourselves, recoup, get a little bit of that acetylcholine, and then maybe jump right back in there.
Well, even on recording days where I record the podcast, I record four or five at a time in one batch. And I go home and I mean, I crash. So it's just a hard hit. But it is affirming to hear that it's brain chemicals because even though I'm, very invested in this whole introvert thing, I still sometimes doubt myself as like, well, am I just not being tough enough? Or, can I just pony up a little bit? How did you go from denial and soldiering through to really, recognizing the value of your nature? What was that transition like for you?
It took a long, long time. So nowadays, I talk to some students at colleges, and many of them already get it. They understand it. They've learned about their introversion. And at the same time, I had somebody who read my blog, and she was 80 years old, and she said, "No, I never knew about this stuff, and I never got it." For me, I was in my 40s when I started I had heard introversion, I'd connected with that term, but I didn't really understand what it was. And it took some kind of jolting when I was in my early 40s to really start to become more aware and learn about what it was. So we've talked a lot about awareness, and I think a lot of it starts with that, and then learning more about what introversion is, not accepting the stereotypes that are floating around us. But for me, I started to learn and read a lot and just think about what was introversion in my life, and then to learn about the strengths. So much of what we hear and from other people, even close family and friends, tends to be negative about introversion. But actually, as you mentioned at the outset, it really is, for me, it became a blessing that I never knew I had. But it took a long road of understanding what are my strengths and how can I apply those in difficult situations and at work or socially or at home in order to feel more comfortable in my own skin.
So you said
And
jolting, though. What jolted you? Because I mean, so many people are, you know, trying so hard to conform to their corporate culture and to advance. And that requires that lots of energy go towards that. And so they don't have currently the energy reserves to read and learn about stuff. They just, so they might relate more to a crisis. Was it a crisis that when you say jolting, is that what you mean personally?
yes, I mean, I went through some really difficult times. And for me, my way of coping with the stress that I was dealing with at work and to try and act during the day was immense. And I dealt with that a lot through eating too much and drinking way too much. And it helped for me to escape. But I realized that was not really the best way to do it. And my health just kept spiraling downward. And I got into some situations where not only was my health at risk, but I was putting myself at risk and doing some dangerous things and over drinking in foreign countries and blacking out.
Oh no.
And I mean, I could have easily, in retrospect, if I hadn't changed, I do believe I would either be in jail or I'd be dead. And so I was on a trip in Singapore, and I really had one of those kind of bad situations. And the next day I sat down and I was like, this can't work. I mean, I can be better than this, and I have to do something different. So I either need to change jobs, I need to change myself, I need to do something. And what I did when I got back home was I invested in a therapist, and we sat down, and she, really, I think therapists are fantastic, right? So they can remove you from the emotions that are all bottled up in our head. So all I can think about are all these horrible things. And she asked really candid questions that made me think about, well, do I have to be put in these situations that are always stressing me out? Do I really think that I'm not worthy? Do I really have no positive traits and strengths? And so we really thought through that, and I realized there are better ways to do that. And so at the end, I went through a long road of learning about myself, and that really helped for me to get out of the rut I was in. And I decided, as I changed jobs shortly thereafter inside of my company, I decided I was going to have to lead my own way.
Because introvert has been used as a word to describe shy or awkward people for so long, we are sort of undercover, and it's become a real challenge to explain to others why you'd rather eat lunch in your car watching YouTube than go out to lunch with everyone else after back-to-back meetings in the office. And when you say to your coworkers, well, it's because I'm really an introvert, they'll cut you off and say, no way, man, don't be so hard on yourself. If you dare to educate them beyond that, they will insist that you're too outgoing to be an introvert. And it can be exhausting, especially when, as an introvert, you already live in a world set up for extroverts. Like group projects at school, desks put together at work, networking events to grow your business. So I want to offer you some practical tips for my extroverted introverts out there. And really, these are energy tips because if you're an introvert, your greatest fear may be catastrophic loss of energy resources, like just a total collapse. It actually happened to me once as a teenager. I also have what my husband likes to joke is a clinical amount of FOMO. And this is a tragic trait when combined with the need to be alone and, in fact, miss out on things in order to refuel. I was a teenager on vacation with my family, and we were pulling out of the driveway, planning on to go to another activity. And I just started to cry. And it felt a little like hyperventilating, actually. I said, I just want to stay home. My confused parents said, okay, and I did. I felt so much better having the place to myself for a few hours. But you know, as a teen, you're learning yourself. So that's actually my first tip. Know yourself. So many of us operate on automatic without really checking in on how we're feeling. And if words are hard for you, try a number system, 1 being catastrophic depletion of energy and 10 being fired up and ready to go. And then ask yourself the simple question after doing something. Did that give or take energy? And I say ask after because if you're like me, you'll dread even the best of plans and secretly hope that it all cancels so you can watch true crime while taking a hot bath. That may or may not be a real example. You can ask yourself the give or take energy question after interacting with people too. This will help you dial in what certain relationships are on the energy scale. And because here's the thing about outgoing introverts, we have terrible pressure that we put on ourselves to be on. So if you notice that you don't feel that pressure with a certain person, try to figure out why. For me, this has really allowed me to relax in situations that would be otherwise excessively draining. I can be myself, which still might include jokes and cutting up, but with less of a feeling of having to be on. And since the process of settling into yourself is a process, it's important to have a few people in your life that you can be yourself with. That way, not everyone in your world is life draining. My second tip is to plug the energy leaks. By being in the habit of asking, is this giving or taking energy, you'll start to map out where your leaks are, and they will be specific and very unique to you. But here are some I think a lot of introverts struggle with. The first one is social media. It's just stimulus overload. It's people overload. And worse yet, it's not really real. A lot of introverts crave authenticity. So you can be on social media, but maybe set a timer or maybe set an appointment in your calendar to interact with it. I also find that not being on your phone at stoplights is strangely energizing. There's something about just gazing at your neighbor and looking around. It's some sort of weird suburban solace, and I'll take it. Also, not using your phone while you're watching TV. I don't even have my phone by my bedstand. It's one of my favorite things to go to bed with just a battery-operated alarm clock. The point is, if you don't want to have people talk at you in real life during every waking moment of your life, why would you let them do that online? Give your introvert brain the quiet space it craves and recharge for real. The second thing is saying yes when you mean no. It's another big energy leak. And it's a tough one because, like I said, we live in a world set up for extroverts. If you work in an office, everyone may want to go to lunch together. But if you're like me, a quiet solo lunch is the best thing ever. Treasured ritual. This is where your calendar can be your gatekeeper and your thermometer. Before saying yes to a social event, I will look at my calendar and see how many other people-y things I've committed to that week. And if it looks like a lot on paper, it's a lot. So how do I decline? I'll just say, hey, I can't this week, but what about next week? Or, whatever alternative date has fewer energy obligations. And the reason that I think this has been so helpful for me as an outgoing introvert is because I actually do feel fulfillment from people. I like them. They're weird and mysterious and funny and insightful. And if you're an outgoing introvert, people like to be around you too. So you may get a lot of requests to hang out or go to things often. The calendar thermometer is seriously the best tip to keep your energy in balance. The third and the last tip is to recharge for real. What really makes you feel refreshed? Is it having the house to yourself and binging on a show, reorganizing a closet or painting, going on a solo hike, maybe one-on-one time with your favorite person? Whatever it is, schedule time to do it. I know, again with the calendar, but if it's not on the calendar, we all know it's not happening. If these tips are a radical turn from how you normally operate, but you would like to start trying them, let your people know. You know, like your work people and your home people, your people. Call it a late New Year's resolution. Don't even bother trying to explain the whole outgoing introvert thing. Just let them know you're going to be scheduling some you time and it might get weird. In fact, that's actually my favorite non-segue. This might be weird, but it's my favorite line and it works for just about everything. Because I think some of the nervous energy comes when you, for some people at least, when you first meet someone and you're in a situation where you're expected to converse. And it's like, okay, maybe if you are an introvert, you probably hate small talk. Is there a minimum amount of small talk that's necessary? Is it socially acceptable just to like jump into deep topics? Like, is there a balance?
I think there's totally a balance. You have to read the room. And I think there is this like asymmetry. I think that's the word for it, actually, like psychological asymmetry, which means we are so expert in our own experience. You know, we know ourselves like nobody else can. And we have such a hard time kind of thinking about what it's like to be another person. So I may go to a party and feel like super timid or reluctant and think, wow, everybody must be sort of shivering and afraid of small talk. But if you imagine the other end of the scenario, like I think a lot about, you know, you're at a party and you learn someone's name and a few seconds later you forget it, which happens to all of us. Often I'm like, oh, I'm just mortified. I can't believe I forgot their name. I'm going to have to ask again and they'll be so offended. But when I flip it around and that happens to me and somebody says, sorry, I didn't catch your name, I don't care at all. Right. So it's like this asymmetry. And so to think, you know, that other people don't want us to strike up a conversation is probably not true, like statistically, you know. And there's, again, I was looking around at the research on this. Conversation with strangers tends to make people happier, even though a lot of us are have sort of social anxiety about it, or some degree of it, like some reluctance to chat with a stranger. But when you look at it, it improves mood and it improves well-being in general. So, you know, it's a good thing, but we have a hard time, I think, seeing outside of our own hesitations. That makes sense.
It does make sense. And it's not that, well, me personally, it's not that I don't want to have a conversation with a stranger. I don't want to be stuck in a boring conversation with a stranger.
Yeah.
And I think it was in your book, you talk about asking for stories instead of answers as a way to convert small talk into slightly more upgraded conversation. Can you give some examples of what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I want to pick up on something you just said, which is getting out of a conversation. And I was at a party recently where a woman was so brilliant at this. You know, my wife and I were talking to her. It was sort of a brief, like, nice enough conversation, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. And she just so generously said, well, it's been so nice talking to you, turned and left. Nobody was offended. Everybody was relieved. And again, I might think like, oh, if I did that, if I said nice to talk to you and left, they'd be offended. But I wasn't. I was glad. She was like doing the heavy lifting of ending the conversation, which, has to end at some point.
And that is the part of conversation that I struggle with the most, because I give off therapist vibes. So, and I'm not a therapist, and I give off mom vibes, and I'm not a mom. So you can imagine those two qualities together. I get cornered frequently. And so
people want to share everything.
Totally. So you're saying I can just say, thanks for this conversation and leave like that. I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah. Or, I'm going to go over there.
I'm going to go over there.
That's a little more blunt.
Oh my God.
But I would experiment with those, again, the tone is everything. It's been great talking to you. Thank you. I'm going to get a drink. I've got to go. I mean, be honest.
Well, I always have to pee, so I'll just use that.
Perfect. Yeah.
Ironically, when I was 20, I decided to start a Mary Kay business, aka a network marketing business. And if you're not familiar with the selling strategy of this particular direct selling business, it's more appointment based and in person versus the online influencer style that a lot of them are now. The good news for me was that these were hour-ish appointments that had a clear beginning, middle, and end, where the other person was not staring at me the whole time because they were, putting on eyeliner or whatever. Tip number 2, if you're wanting to improve your networking skills and you're an introvert, you don't have to dive into a formal business card exchanging setting. Choose a gathering with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Like a baby shower. You can practice all your networking skills with all the comfort of knowing that soon the mom-to-be will be awkwardly opening up all the baby shower gifts in front of everyone, and you'll be off the hook. So, keep that in mind. Now, the bad news for me was I was still so nervous at these appointments that I would pit out all of my clothes and often repeat the same question. You should have seen the look of pity and concern on the people's faces the second time I asked, "So, did you grow up here?" The good news was exposure therapy can work, and I realized that despite my sweaty armpit clothes, I had the ability to make other people feel at ease pretty quickly, actually. Instant rapport was kind of like my superpower. So tip number 3 for networking as an introvert, identify your superpower. I've noticed that we introverts have special powers. Many of us are keyed into the subtleties of voice tone, body language, and even the way things are worded. This set of observational skills can make us great at mirroring, which is the nonverbal technique where a person copies the body language, vocal qualities, or attitude of another person. It's a great thing. Unless you accidentally take on the accent of the other person, that is super awkward. So maybe your superpower is mirroring, or maybe people have told you you have a calming presence, or that you're funny. Whatever it is, find your superpower. And when you're in a networking situation, lead with that. Lead with your superpower. So instant rapport, as I said, is my superpower. Well, most of the time. Intimidation at that time was still my kryptonite. There were certain professions or educational levels that just seemed to fry my brain. So, what do you do for a living? I'm a lawyer. Cool. So, I got help. At my next weekly Mary Kay training meeting, I asked a fellow consultant for advice. I asked her, what can I say as a follow-up when people tell me they're in the military? She explained that I could ask what branch or what they do in the military. It had never occurred to me, what do they do in the military? And then I asked someone in the medical field for an intelligent sounding follow-up to, I'm a doctor or I'm a nurse. I put these tips to use right away, and they did wonders for my rapport building and underarm sweat a little bit. So tip number 4 is keep a Swiss Army knife of questions on you at all times, because if networking is about connecting, conversation is the bridge. And if you're an introvert, you likely hate small talk, but guess what? Nearly everyone else does too. They just don't feel it as deeply in their souls as we do. But by having this Swiss Army knife of questions on you, you'll not only make your networking experience more tolerable for you, but also more life-giving to the person who has to talk to you, which makes you more memorable, which is kind of the great benefit of networking in the first place, right? So I put together some of these questions. There are 4 that I put together for you. And number 1 is, what do you specialize in? I find this question works for almost any profession. I'm a doctor. What do you specialize in? I'm a mechanic. I'm an engineer. I'm an artist, or even the dreaded, I'm a consultant. Well, what do you specialize in? Question 2, what did you do before you were a blank? Just be sure to ask this long after you've shown interest in their current profession. Otherwise, it will be interpreted as saying their current career is boring. This is a great question though, because it peels back the layers of who people are. People are so nuanced, but they don't always get an opportunity to share the other sides of themselves. Tip number 3 is, what kind of projects have you been working on lately? And tip number 4, or question number 4, is, how do you know so-and-so, the name of the host? This can begin your detective search for common ground, and it's great for non-professional settings. And just for giggles, Here are 4 phrases really, that you should just totally avoid. Number 1, oh God, I could never do that. Not a compliment. Number 2, breaking the ice with a complaint. I hate these sorts of events. Number 3, reacting with any sort of stereotype. I'm from Nebraska. Oh, was your yard a cornfield? Yes, it was, by the way. Asking what their spouse does in response to them sharing what they do. And I would love to hear from you if that has ever happened to you. I've only ever heard it happening to females. So when asked what I do, and it's more in the creative space, for example, what do you do? Oh, I'm an artist. Oh, what does your husband do? In other words, A, it's not interesting what you do, and B, you must not make any money, so you must be married. So yeah, avoid that. But comment below if that's ever happened to you. So anyway, fast forward a few years, I was going through a really stressful divorce. I mean, all divorce is stressful, right? But the point of bringing up that it's stressful is because stress can amplify our quirks and our needs, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So that's something to be aware of. Anyway, I got a part-time job as an executive admin assistant for a business broker. He was an extrovert and a master networker. And he was a super kind man who was just really patient with my heightened state of intro quirks. Get it? Introverted quirks. T-shirt coming soon. Anyway, these quirks were extra noticeable when I realized that part of my job was attending these networking events with him, but I was not allowed to hide in the corner and take notes. He was a natural mentor, though, and saw an opportunity to socialize my weird little self. I actually had to stand up and introduce myself. I had to eat in front of other people, make meaningful small talk. Oh, and most of these people were men people. I had only been comfortable connecting with women this whole time in my professional life, and so that just was terrifying for me. And I'm laughing a little inside because I can just feel your puzzled expressions right now, especially if you know me or you've been watching my videos for a long time. Like, how could she be so shy or such a spaz? Well, you know. Tip number 5 is look for the layers. I'm layered. People are layered, and paradox exists in everyone. So if you think someone is one-dimensional, I promise you just aren't asking enough questions. So seeing my panic about not getting to be invisible at these events, Mike, my boss, explained that networking is simply connecting with others. He showed me about how you show someone you care before you show that you care about the bottom line. And he lived that. Even when he was late, which was pretty much always, he would stop and pivot towards you and greet you by name. I later learned this move is called the big baby pivot. Tip number 6 for networking as an introvert is use the big baby pivot to make yourself and those around you feel important and at ease. Now, this name comes from the reaction given when a cute baby toddles into a group of adults. Almost always, the adults will do a complete body turn towards the baby and offer a big welcoming smile. So you would think as an introvert this would be horrible, but try it. In addition to making the other people feel like you're some kind of long-lost childhood friend, I suspect it tricks your own brain into similar feelings, which can put you at ease and really get some good conversation flowing. Hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching. If you love breaking free from the algorithm to explore curiosity, join me each week by hitting subscribe and the bell for new upload notifications.